Good morning and hello, everybody. Welcome to NAEA, and thank you for coming to my presentation here. My name is Matt Pembleton, and I'm excited to share my research with you about two fields I think art education can get behind: hip hop pedagogy and new media literacy. This was a theory driven project that asked what we might learn from these two super cool areas, using, of course, Hamilton, Candy Wiley, and the Carters. Some light housekeeping. So just let me know if you need any adjustments or accommodations at any time during the presentation. Obviously, you are listening to this later on, so take breaks, move around, and use the resources that I am putting onto the app. Um, and let me know if you have any questions. And also, feel free to pause the video often because there'll be some polls you can reflect on your journey that we're going to go on together. On the bottom there is my contact info, and I'm really excited to meet with you and connect. And oh, that's what I look like, in case you were wondering. Before we dive into our session, I'd like to invite you to join me in a 30-second mindfulness breathing to start our morning off well. So settle in, relax, reflect on your morning wherever you are, and focus on your goals. You may try deep breathing 3 seconds in, 4 seconds out, and repeat. All right, thank you. I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge that the land we're on right now is Indigenous territory. For me, it's the Lenni Lenape Nation and their people. Um, Their land encompasses northern Delaware, eastern Pennsylvania, New Jersey, which is where I'm from, and southern New York, including western Long Island. We aspire to show appreciation, respect, and concern for all peoples and our environment. I find it important to start here as a component of my research because a component of it is partially rooted in post-colonialist theory that aims to describe, analyze, honor, and work towards healing conflict between the culturally oppressed and their oppressors. Part of our job as art teachers is to embody these sometimes challenging, yes, but important aspects of our world and work towards positive change. Speaking of respect, I want to state the following objectives and format of my talk today in order to respect your time and interests. This entire piece is considered as a condensed iteration of my graduate thesis research conducted between 2018 and 2019. While we'll definitely be looking at stills and artwork exemplars, the emphasis for us this morning is to learn about ideas and ways of how art education is aligned and can borrow from hip hop pedagogy and new media literacy. I'll primarily be reading passages from my paper, pausing here and there. And as I said, we'll have some time to break it up, and you can pause and answer a poll here or there. Content-wise, this is a grounded theory case study that articulates why I think the two discourses are important. I'll present to you data on their previously unestablished links and ultimately offer some implications for teachers and researchers at the end. By using a constructivist approach, I hope to begin a dialogue here, not only using the voices and experience of scholars in the field, but also a bit of my own as both a writer of this research and art teacher. I also want to state to you all that I am in no way an expert in either discipline. Hip hop culture and new media are not a big part of my lived experience. As such, I'll be referencing a fair number of incredible authors and artists who are way smarter than me. Their voices in the text herein should be celebrated, and I'll do my best to uphold that. If all of this sounds intriguing for you, then wonderful. Thanks for your patience so far. All right, so quick context about where I'm coming from. I've been teaching for about 9 years, ranging from kindergarten to undergraduates. As a researcher, I'm mostly interested in what Leanne Bell and Dipti Desai call alternative epistemologies, or different ways of knowing. From public performance art to interactive wall drawings, I like creating situations that challenge art education practice. These ideas are often inspired by contemporary culture, like the planking phase. Do you remember that trend from? Anyway, um, on the right, those two photos represent some curricular ideas I was able to publish with NAEA. and actually practice with New Jersey public school students in collaboration with my co-authors from TCNJ, Dr. Lisa Lejevic and Amanda Antilli. And I'll tell you, the performance art in the classroom articles were provocations in an attempt to inspire considerations about what teaching could look like if we as practitioners embrace different media, practices, and mindsets from disciplines outside most standard art programs. We concluded that if educators are open to unconventional, informal, or uncomfortable modes of engagement and ways of thinking, everyone might be able to form new conceptions of their surroundings, recreate their lived realities, um, embrace learning through creative possibilities, and bring new worlds to life, right? This is the premise, unraveling disparate discourses and weaving them together into something more palatable for art ed is what guides my teaching and my scholarly pursuits. So yeah, this background led me to Vermont College of Fine Arts, where I started graduate school in 2018. So that year, all right, three incredible pieces of media captivated my attention: Apeshit by Beyonce and Jay-Z, Hamilton, and Kahindi Wiley. As I watched and listened to these texts obsessively, they inspired a variety of questions that ultimately formed my thesis. To me, these happenings seem to have didactic potential. The Carters sparked the greatest level of excitement, largely due to its tangible connections to my own AP art history curricula. Immediately upon seeing that video, I conceived basic discussion questions such as, what does the juxtaposition between the singers and famous masterpieces such as Mona Lisa signify? Or can music videos be considered art? Right? As question after question percolated, I realized that I was rapidly encroaching upon larger issues and knowledge theories that necessitated deeper levels of consideration. Thus led to my main research questions for my paper and our conversation. In the end, they're relatively straightforward. What can art educators learn from hip hop pedagogy and new media literacy? How are they connected? Why they matter for art education classrooms? And how they manifest in contemporary media. By writing this and by talking with you today, I hope these ideas extend the scholarship that is currently happening in hip hop based education and new media research. Or perhaps, hey, encourage more people to become part of the conversation, some of which has been happening right here during the NAE conventions. Last year, there was something really incredible that some folks put on. I think it was a forum on hip hop, which, yeah, so it's definitely in the conversation. But hey, look, connecting art ed to these two areas is more than appropriate today, given their significant presence in youth culture across the world. Though hip hop pedagogy and new media lit are rich, their connection to art ed is still in its infancy. This gap is the fundamental reason behind why the study matters. These ideas and texts are not just incredible hooks to engage students' interest in prior knowledge, but they also hold deeply rooted educational principles that teachers can utilize to transform pedagogy, curriculum, or both. We'll soon see how the inherent characteristics of hip hop and new media, such as their valuing of student knowledge, lived experience, media creation literacy, remix and appropriation, and visual culture, to name a few, are directly related to the broader objectives of any art education program, regardless of level or locale. We're going to be exploring these characteristics throughout the rest of the presentation. Now, allow me to pause and ask you to reflect for a moment. Have you ever been inspired by a text from popular culture that worked its way into your research or curricula? If not, what? What were you inspired to do? Take a minute to, leave this response, and you can pause the video and go to your poll, and come back here when you are ready. Okay, moving on. Based on my research, these two domains fit quite well under this larger umbrella. Hip hop pedagogy and new media literacy represent a reimagining of visual culture education, itself a reimagining of art history education, itself one of the pillars of the classic DBAE, or discipline based art ed. While I can certainly discuss the literature surrounding all these levels for you, for the sake of time, let's just discuss some literature in visual culture and how I use it as a gateway into hip hop pedagogy and new media literacy specifically. I promise, very briefly. For over 20 years, art educators have propelled a visual culture discourse into the classroom. For this conversation, let's highlight how visual culture education values diverse media. Chin, Duncombe, Desai, and many other writers understand that visual culture as an establishment of learning supports a more universal visual conceptual arena where both high art and pop culture might exist at the same time. More so, engaging with visual culture permits students to navigate between media forms, internet, newspaper, apps, um, between forms to develop skills and outlooks beneficial to success. New media literacy really articulates, supports these ideas, which we'll get to in a couple minutes. Scholars of visual culture remind us that they do not merely study media texts in a vacuum. For Nicholas Mirzoff, visual culture is a comparative mode of critical practice that permits the study of diverse media forms together. This approach is not just a choice in line with empirical modes of study, but a requirement because all media are necessarily mixed and not static objects in a prescribed canon. Instead, media texts are scrutinized and are viewed as active agents that draw us to look and to feel or speak in particular ways. Any artifact from visual culture, authors like Sturgeon and Cartwright argue, has the power to transmit, retain, and change meaning between social networks. This means that artifacts such as images and image technologies have politics and agency. It's really important to note the agentive potential of media. Even though in recent decades technology has helped connect people in amazing ways, it's foremost rooted in complex systems of power that tend to rank different areas of visual culture to systems of supposed quality and importance. This aspect of visual culture, that class-based and highbrow, lowbrow cultural divide, it's kind of important to highlight because it forms the backdrop for our upcoming section on hip hop and hip hop pedagogy, a culture that very much reflects these complex social systems like globalization and power dynamics related to gender, race, and class, among many others. It's an exciting time here to be a part of our community because many of us are considering how we connect to the lived experiences of students in our classrooms. Let's get into that. All right. Now, to clarify, hip hop pedagogy is not just inserting rap into the classroom, all right? Rather, it's an engagement with hip hop's explicit and implicit educational elements inspired by its culture, such as consciousness and knowledge of self. It starts from the premise that hip hop can be a lens for socio-political action, especially for folks underrepresented within the mainstream. Without going into the rich history without going into the rich history of hip hop too much, again, that's not really my story to tell, and I imagine it's different for every person. Let's move forward to the discussion about what hip hop scholars are talking about. Hip hop pedagogy is the fusing of hip hop with critical pedagogy that starts from the premise that it's an important lens for sociopolitical analysis and representation of marginalized communities. It's grown into a bustling field of study over the past decade really, thanks to the works of Emden, Hill, Pachauer, Seidel, Chang, Ackham, and Stovall, many other change makers out there to name. For me, this discourse neatly connects back to art education because they both play a vital role in making visible the stories, voices, and experiences of people who are rendered invisible by structures of dominance and provide new lenses for looking at the world and ourselves in relation to it. That was a quote by Bell and Desai from 2011 there. It's really made its way into universities, counseling services, and K-12 classrooms across the globe. Out of all the venues, I must shout out the High School of Recording Arts, HSRA, in St. Paul, Minnesota. In his 2011 book, Hip Hop Genius, which I just found, by the way, has a second edition, Sam Seidel chronicles HSRA's commitment to teach high school students through music content creation, rap, songs, album art, performances, the production behind it all. That work is exemplary of what hip hop, pedagogy, and new media literacy, which is our second topic, looks like in a secondary setting. The school is an embodiment of core values of representing authenticity and student voice. For those of you really intrigued about this, I cannot recommend that text enough. Breaking down the subject a bit more for us, James Braxton Peterson identifies four core educational elements: knowledge, consciousness, search and discovery, and participation. This is an expansion of the four aesthetics of hip hop, namely DJing, MCing, breakdancing, and graffiti art. Allow me to briefly define its four educational components. Knowledge. The fifth and often overlooked element is knowledge of oneself and one's culture. This component of hip hop underpins the majority of literature when it comes to situating it within the context of education and critical pedagogy. In order to clarify the term knowledge in this context, it's essential to break down its meanings using Peterson's view on the subject. First, he describes knowledge as the feeling of pride those deeply affiliated with hip hop feel in knowing information and facts and, you know, related to its culture. The second type is the valuing of knowledge that also assumes its traditional meaning of skills and information cultivated and learned through education and experience. Number two is consciousness. Peterson goes on to define it as the knowledge of self, one's surroundings, as well as the social and or historical forces at play in one's existence. He suggests that young people who consider themselves constituents of a hip hop generation will likely be invested in the socio-political issues of the day, especially as they are chronicled by and through the music of the culture. Emery Pachauer describes this conscious aspect of hip hop as those types of rap songs that follow in the protests and liberatory traditions of Black music. It's a quote from 2012. Artists like Public Enemy, Mos Def, Lauryn Hill, and Kendrick Lamar, to this author, often unpack inequity and oppression in the world that is structural, systematic, and reproduced. It is this very type of work that demonstrates how the consciousness behind hip hop is not only dedicated to articulating place and space, but also implies a commitment to social justice. The third educational element of hip hop, search and discovery, beckons young people to locate themselves in the music and experiences that speak directly to their own lives and histories. To explain this element, Peterson offers the example of sampling, a pioneering aspect of even the earliest hip hop. DJ Kool Herc, for example, took instrumental portions off of James Brown records and spun them rhythmically using two turntables, thereby utilizing samples from previous tracks woven together to create new music. A great deal of learning can occur there. The key aspect of search and discovery is instigating those to stretch and do the work of learning about what they're hearing, seeing, or reading. The same way art teachers might be interested in the ways their students retrieve samples of visual information from multiple sources to inform a piece, hip hop artists appropriate, reference, and remix content to create new work and really add their voice to the rich lexicon. The fourth and arguably most active educational component of hip hop is participation. This element is based on the cipher, or the quintessential space in which people create hip hop, according to Hill and Pachauer, 2013. The cipher is an active, pluralistic space that offers a shared mentality of engagement. The concept of it allows participants to learn and grow. For hip hop-based educators, the structure reconceptualizes the ways that participation can function in different classroom contexts. This work happens by arranging for the students to be the focal point within the discourse. Yet another connection to critical pedagogy. Whew. Okay, before we move on, let's pause and reflect again for a couple minutes. You can pause this video. What are some key words or phrases that stand out for you while discussing hip hop pedagogy? Has anything presented so far changed, evolved, or prior knowledge on the subjects? Um, you know, go ahead and pause and leave a comment, and I'm going to just continue right now. So come on back. Just getting a drink of water there. Okay. Our second discourse, new media literacy, is a field that emerged in response to the rapidly changing technological landscape that we call our world. Henry Jenkins, among his co-authors, devised 11 skills considered essential for the younger, plugged-in generation in order to effectively engage with the world around them. New media literacy builds on other media scholars such as Buckingham and Potter. Those scholars, in different ways, have helped facilitate media literacy into an integral and, in some districts, a mandatory component of effective 21st century schooling. New media literacy is defined as a set of cultural competencies and social skills that young people need, really, in the new media landscape. That's a quote from Jenkins in 2009. The authors developed 11 skills in response to changes in the media environment, which are altering our understanding of literacy and requiring new habits of mind, new ways of processing culture, and interacting with the world. These writers helped reshape media literacy by adding layers of complexity that can help us become capable content creators for a global audience and teach kids how to do it well. While there are many critics against the degree to which media technology should be in school, it's clear that it's not going to go away anytime soon. Jenkins argues the site for new media literacy based learning can actually thrive in traditional schools. But like many creative efforts and novel ideas, sometimes they're stymied by institutional factors and obligations like standardized based assessment, testing, and regular class periods. The authors here compiled a collection of dispositions that were identified as a core set of social skills and cultural competencies that young people should acquire if they are to be full, active, creative, and ethical participants in this merging participatory culture. That's a quote. You can see all the skills on the right hand of the screen right now. For those interested in the study, I have to encourage you to read their amazing piece that was put together. That was a MacArthur grant. For us, though, only 4 of the 11 skills are selected. For me and my research, these were the ones that had the most to offer in terms of connectedness to hip hop pedagogy and art education. They are appropriation, or the ability to meaningfully sample and remix content, collective intelligence, the ability to pool knowledge and compare notes with others towards a common goal, transmedia navigation, the ability to deal with the flow of stories and information across multiple modalities, and negotiation, the ability to travel across different communities, discerning and respecting multiple perspectives, and grasping and following alternative sets of norms. Another pause. It's time for new media literacy. Any some keywords or phrases that stand out for you? If anything I presented here changed your knowledge or inspired something? Go ahead and pause this video and leave a comment in your poll. If you can come back in like maybe 3 minutes. All right, now on to the fun part. To actually make sense of these two incredible disciplines, their core elements, and how they work together towards towards furthering art education, I gathered evidence from 3 sources: the Broadway musical Hamilton, the work of Candy Wiley, and the music video titled Ape Shit by the Carters, otherwise known as, of course, Beyonce and Jay-Z. While previous knowledge or viewings of these texts aren't required, I feel like it would be helpful. So this might be another opportunity for you to pause this video and go watch them, particularly the music video. Um, Obviously, I won't be expecting you to go down and check out Hamilton on Broadway if obviously that's not something you can do. All right, so Just to quickly show you how I gathered evidence, I paired the elements covered earlier with a counterpart. I then applied these connections to the three case studies. To make this as effective as possible, I created a coding sheet that helped me look for the same themes consistently. So, for example, instances of appropriation and search and discovery in the three texts. The memo form listed here, it basically listed my criteria supporting the fusing of the two discourses and specific occurrences that, for my grounded theory approaches I was using, embodied those traits. After data collection was complete through repeated readings and corresponding memoing, I then used semiotics and content analysis to identify attributes that tangibly represent the education elements described earlier. All right, let's see what we found. All right. Number one, knowledge plus transmedia navigation. These two categories pair because they articulate how both fields rely on a shared system of information that is collected, transmitted, and used within a specific place. Context is key for both discourses here because lived/personal stories, past and present, represent an accumulated history of education experience that, that constitute the pride and voices of the culture's community members. How this banked knowledge is used within the ongoing flow of media, i.e., creation of music, theater, fine art, is one way to understand how transmedia navigation and knowledge can exhibit in data format. All three of our case studies pull from past and present knowledge bases to create new work, often in completely different media. Lin-Manuel Miranda, for example, utilizes upbringing in New York as a basis for his musical. Surrounded by the heart of hip hop's cultural legacy, Miranda embodies it as part of his identity. Like the Carters, these folks are expert experts in their field. Their knowledge is incredible, which helps explain why Lin-Manuel was able to deftly incorporate a plethora of references and methods throughout the musical. For example, a pair of cabinet meetings in the second act structures as rap battles, a popular style of performance where two MCs trade verses improvisationally. The Carters themselves showcase their understanding of another history, i.e., art history, through apeshit by their choice of performing in the Louvre. This choice to perform and film there is rooted in traditions which, according to art historian James Smalls, demonstrate imperial and colonial might through conquest and acquisition. The Carters employ this knowledge and challenge their viewers to rethink existing knowledge about the museum and its collection of iconic works by positioning themselves in front of paintings. Though relatively straightforward action, these juxtapositions require a fair amount of decoding and context to understand. Similarly, a fair amount of Kehinde Wiley's work relies on canonical art history and, almost European knowledge. Additional discussion on how Wiley does this will be discussed in the section on appropriation coming up soon. Consciousness and negotiation are coded together since they each are concerned with the principles of respect and informed socio-political action. This type of work often manifests in cultural artifacts that propose alternative ways of thinking about the world in which we live and how we see it. When artists use this knowledge of self, paired with the skill to negotiate amongst diverse communities that have perspectives outside their own, effective experiences can occur that might even stimulate positive change. Each of these cases in the study connect these ideas, especially under the umbrella of social justice related to class, race, and power. The core of Apeshit, and by this time I definitely recommend you watch it since you're at home now. The core of that music video, as both Smalls and Leorn recount, is related to the Carters' intentional messaging about class and power. Leorin argues that regardless of the viewer's background, it can be agreed that the Louvre is not just a former French palace or museum, but more so a metaphoric space for both grandness and decadence. As an institution that has traditionally prioritized Western art and its colonial seal of influence, the Carter's quote unquote invasion of the museum raises questions about who belongs in it. What counts as important canonical knowledge, these authors continue, is obvious. The Carters do this by quickly cutting to close-ups of the few black figures in paintings, which exist often in the background. One of the most poignant examples of this is when the camera turns to Jay-Z in front of Garrett Hall's monumental painting, The Raft of Medusa. According to Smalls, and this is a bit of a long quote, this gargantuan canvas contains three black men among the human debris who are used emblematically by the artist to relay the story of a human tragedy. The most visible black figure is located at the apex of the composition. He is energetic and heroic in his display of a muscular back. It is Jay-Z who is shown in front of the painting and, at one brief moment, is caught gazing up at the black Hercules who constitutes the focal point of the drama and symbolizes black people as both survivors and saviors. Similarly, Candy Wiley's Oeuvre has a lot to do with the people of color and their underrepresentation. His paintings, like Apeshit, reconstruct ideas regarding the non-white body and the various cultures it might represent, especially since they have represented unauthentically in history. The Carters and Wiley do not do this work easily, though. They must also be skilled in navigating and occupying different spaces with varying sets of norms and histories. For Wiley, this comes easily because, in his own words, artists are people who occupy different spaces. And I think a lot of us, not just artists, but people of color, know what it means to code switch, being able to occupy multiple spaces. Being able to occupy multiple spaces in a way exemplifies where America is. The conflicting twin narratives that can be at once appalling and beguiling exist in all of us, and I think that's part of what my work is about. That's a quote from a 2018 Time kind of video presentation. Hamilton exhibits additional ideas related to consciousness. Specifically, the musical makes very clear call-outs to social justice issues that often unpack inequality, and oppression in the world that is structured, systematic, and reproduced. It's a quote by Bashauer again. For example, the creators frame the issue of immigration throughout the show. They do not skirt the fact that the titular character is, quote unquote, the prototype of the immigrant striver, hardworking, ambitious, desperate to prove himself. The quick lyric, quote, immigrants who get the job done, unquote, in the Battle of Yorktown is the best example that shows Hamilton is cognizant of recent administration's anti-immigration politics in the US and, in other countries too. Number 3, the creative practices that search and discovery and appropriation embody make them appropriate to pair together. Each code describes how artists might meaningfully reference their own culture and daily life experiences through the production of creative works. The process of sampling and remixing, or appropriation and transformation, are both relevant terms to help describe these phenomena within hip-hop media, hip-hop pedagogy, and new media literacy. Evidence of these skills, not surprisingly, appeared within the cases extensively. I mean, let's be real. The simple fact that Lin-Manuel Miranda made a hip-hop musical from a scholarly biography is the epitome of appropriation in the best way speaking. Hamilton is foremost built thanks to a years-long investigation into a pair of traditions that are closest to his psyche, rap music and musical theater. These inspirations manifested as samples, structures, and connective themes, which in part also serve as signals to people from diverse backgrounds that the show is meant for everybody. I read in his 2016 book that some of the specific samplings that occur in the show included Notorious B.I.G., Pharrell, even the Beatles. In Apeshit, the Carters sought out specific works of art that could be used to contrast themselves throughout the video. In their own way, they sample our history to express ideas and discoveries about the museum and the institutional problems that, some institutions still embody. Um, a tangible example of this new media literacy skill is present across the video itself when the power couple, for example, is in front of the winged victory of Samothrace. Um, Again, my AP art history teachers know this sculpture well. Here, though, in the bottom right of your screen, Beyonce dresses in a billowing white dress that echoes the dynamic Hellenism character of the statue. The movements of her background dancers furthermore add a degree of remixing as they borrow poses from the iconic sculpture. On a similar note, Candy Wiley appropriates compositions found across the art historical lexicon. He uses classical sculptures, Gothic stained glass windows, neoclassical paintings, all subject matter for his work. On the left, Napoleon leading the army over the Alps from 2005 is a poignant example showcasing the ways Wiley uses his knowledge of art history to challenge his viewers to consider which stories are told and by whom. For Wiley, painting portraits has always been about saying yes to things we want to celebrate. In his own words, the artist goes on to say, but I think about the portrait, but I think also the portrait has been, the commissioned portrait, has oftentimes been about society saying, who are the people we collectively want to honor? That's from the same Time piece from 2018. His decision to replace Jacques-Louis David's Napoleon with a young black man wearing modern clothes like Timberlands and camouflage reflect his lived context. More importantly, it demonstrates how he is using history as a means to embolden his community and honor it. The artist is simultaneously celebrating his own identity and constructs a way for viewers to perhaps develop their sense of empathy to those represented. I mean, it is undeniable that his works function as an invitation into conversations about identity, social justice, and empowerment, right? I mean, for our students, talk about an amazing avenue for them. All right, here we have our final set of elements that I put together, namely participation and collective intelligence. Both ideas move the focus of participation away from the individual to the group, a cipher in a way, right? Which has, quote unquote, the ability to pool knowledge and compare notes with others towards a common goal. Working alongside one's close community is a common thread for us here. And, as many of us know, any significant media production involves the collaboration of many skilled professionals. As Miranda and McCarter point out, the value of these community-oriented work can yield surprising discoveries. They go on to remark that sometimes the right person shows the right story at the right moment, and through a combination of luck and design, creative expression gains new force. While Miranda did certainly create Hamilton's score, lyrics, and story by himself, the show relied on the work of dozens, if not hundreds, of very gifted people to be realized. A bunch of people from a bunch of backgrounds had to come together to make it work. And it did so well that even a bigger bunch of people from yet more backgrounds flocked to see the show and continue to do so. Two individuals Lin-Manuel included heavily in the production of Hamilton, as I read in some research, were the set designer David Corins and Ron Chernow, the author of the biography, the original book there. On the question about what aesthetic the set would have, Corins began to imagine immigrants coming to the New World, landing on unfamiliar shores, and building cities out of their ships. This input resulted in a multi-leveled space reminiscent of scaffolding and building sites, mostly made of wooden beams. Along the same lines, Miranda asked Chernow to be the historical consultant for the show. Chernow encouraged Lin-Manuel greatly and provided him feedback over the years of writing. They would take notes from each other and be able to strike a balance between historical fact and creative necessities. One main example I found would be regarding the early formation of the main quartet of characters, namely Hamilton's posse of himself, Marquis de Lafayette, Hercules Mulligan, and John Laurens. By participating within the context of their knowledge, the two experts helped Miranda get the show off the ground to make it memorable, historically sound, and forever, uh, you know, in our hearts, I guess, or in our minds. So, what did we find? What did my data help us see? Um, really, all of it helped support really did help support my theory that the two fields absolutely support art education theory and practice. They matter because they, one, focus on critical pedagogy that empowers students through social justice and inclusion. Two, they are participatory cultures that value innovation and experimentation. Three, they move away from formal, institutionalized models and the ways we view high and low class. Four, they nurture aesthetic sensibilities and provide lenses to look at art. And five, foster engagement with the present due to their connectedness to quote unquote third sites like hip hop and the internet. That last point in particular, I think, underlines the necessary inclusion of media literacy in schools as a means for a democratic society to provoke conversations about social justice, cultural diversity, and inclusion. These are much needed learning opportunities for kids in contemporary society who consume media laden messages throughout the day. um, we'll end with just a couple suggestions for teachers and perhaps researchers or scholars who would be interested in kind of furthering this line of thinking. Let's see. Truly, in my opinion, any skill within both fields can be remixed for any of you. Exciting conversations and surprising creative products can result when students work with these new ways of thinking. Um, Teachers can implement these disciplines and skills in tangible, hands-on ways to re-envision existing practices and curricula. Consider, for example, expanding existing projects or units to include popular media. Explore trends in social media, viral videos, and current events and weave them into motivational dialogues at the start of your class period. Maybe rather than show that classical sculpture or modernist painting for the 20th time, review recent Whitney biennials or trending artists in the community, the local community with students rather. This ties into the overarching goals of each discipline that values lived experiences of students and new media. A not so subtle long goal here, or something like that, is to create active observers of the world, regardless of medium. Each of these visual culture oriented texts, I think, has the potential for classroom use in the form of forum discussions or reflective questions. Um, Practitioners can consider designing shorter classroom-wide and or small group conversations revolving around some of the themes that manifested through engaging with the case studies. For example, representations of identity or who gets exhibited in major museums, right? In the classroom, this could take the form of a compare contrast exercise, analyzing how these issues have changed over the years. That might permit students to see how much progress has been made, right? And articulate why and perhaps what causes gaps to still exist. Lesson structures like this are designed to help balance teacher-driven lecture, you know, with student-written reflections and questions about a significant other and open-ended interpretations about what we see, thinking about the images and why. Furthermore, any one of the case studies ties into lessons about semiotics, or the image or words and its meaning together, the signifier and the signified. In terms of tangible studio-driven recommendations, teachers can embrace a number of the new media literacy skills to supplement what they already do. Um, Consider expanding pre-built lessons using appropriation, for example. While direct copying might be, not as advisable, students might be required to visually reference a contemporary artist and later explain their process through blogging. Um, Say for example, you have them find a work of interest. Students can take some notes, maybe about the information or context of the work. Then students can be instructed to carefully analyze the work, maybe noting its color, design principles, and composition. With these qualities in mind, the kids can say, remix the work, right, in a unique and personal way. Um, if anyone's curious, I actually have an example of something like that up at the front. Um, Finally, one of the best ways I think to do this in the classroom is for teachers to facilitate discussions directly between peers, right? By integrating daily student-driven conversations about the course content, maybe throwing in some, contemporary references and, you know, not so um, random like connections to media or current happenings or current events. Um, Having them talk with each other could be really, really positive. Um, and maybe the students will be able to hone their critical thinking skills and develop their knowledge via a range of topical considerations. Again, like talking about their lived experience and what they're learning is really, really again an agentive, powerful thing you can do. Um, the sense of togetherness, most of all, I think, describes that nature, again, of that cipher, right? And as a way for educators to embody hip hop in their classroom. I mean, this NAEA convention, if you really think about it, is like our own little cipher. Um, Lastly, this work's not over. It's just the beginning. And most of all, I encourage art ed educators like all of you to take these ideas, make changes to them based on your and your students' interests, and just run with it. After all, what is more hip hop than that, right? Thank you very much for your time. Um, I hope you enjoy the rest of the convention. Um, my contact info is there again if you want to get in touch. But also, there will be plenty of polls for you. So, one last poll for the online folks would be, your final thoughts. How did this go for you? Was there a set of data elements that was intriguing for you? How might you think about hip hop pedagogy and new media literacy in your classroom, right? And please, leave me questions, right? And I'll also continue to explore the app and give you a bunch of handouts and further reading, especially the reference sheet. So I'll put a full list of references for you on the app there, so you can take a look at some of these amazing writers for yourself. All right. Well, again, thank you very much for your time and your energy. Remember, the work is never over, and I hope you um, have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.